Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Connecting the Dots, a podcast hosted by me, Neil Robertson. Joining me on today's podcast is Georgie Mizen, founder of the marketing and advertising agency Fable Verse, and she's here today to talk about quality management best practices for B2C advertising. Georgia, thanks for joining.
Nice to see you. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. You're in a very swanky co-working space there, aren't you?
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, we have a really great space here in Bristol.
Fantastic. So can you start by providing some background on your career to date and what led you to set up Fable Verse?
Absolutely. So I was a copywriter by trade for the best part of a decade. And around 2015, I realized the digital age was well underway and I was going to have to diversify my skill set a little bit to stay relevant in the market, but also, future-proof my career going forward. So to be honest, I taught myself how to do social media and Google advertising off the internet. So I used Professor Google and taught myself how to do everything and really learned on the job. And then eventually over sort of the past 6 years, I've grown what was originally a limited company set up to be able to take on a freelance client into what is Fable Verse today, where we have a network of around 20 freelancers, 6 of whom are regular contributors to the brand. And we work with a variety of clients across a variety of services. So that's a very potted history of where I've come from and how I've got to where I am today.
Professor Google is the best professor, I think.
Exactly.
Certainly the best professor I've had. So can you give me an insight into Fable Verse, specifically the sectors you work with, the services you provide, and the main headaches you solve, that kind of stuff?
Sure. So Fable Verse is a marketing and advertising agency. We work with small businesses that tend not to have a marketing function of their own, loosely in the sort of hobbies and leisures sector. So everything from gaming, food and drink, children's leisure parks, we've got a yoga studio, we've got language schools, etc. So basically things that people do for fun. We've coined a term as anything that puts a smile on your face. So my philosophy is very much that we work with people who sell something that's easy to sell and that has a creative base for the people that I work with in my team to be able to create interesting advertising and great campaigns from. In terms of the services that we offer, we basically are a bit of a plug in and play. So we work with agencies as well as clients. So clients that don't have a marketing function, we can kind of plug into them. We also provide to agencies we plug a skill gap basically. So bigger agencies that don't have advertising function, for example, we'll go in and provide that alongside an agency and white label our services to be able to provide their end client. And we do everything from branding, website tone of voice, content for websites, video production, graphic production, all the way through to SEO, email newsletters and email marketing, and our specialist service, which is advertising across social media and Google and all the other platforms.
Yeah, fantastic. I remember you saying in our call with the other day that, you have this quite unique business model whereby you work with freelancers as well, like exclusively with freelancers. And I thought that was really cool, actually. So do you want to talk a little bit more about that and kind of what led you to go down that path?
Absolutely. So I'm really passionate about freelance being a genuine option for your entire career. I was a freelancer for a decade. I don't see why there's any reason that you have to be a 9-to-5er that employed in a traditional way. You can still make fantastic salary. You can still have great workmates. You can still have a traditional sort of job setup without having the constraints of a 9-to-5. So when I created Fable Verse over a year ago in the iteration that it is now, I was very keen to work with freelancers exclusively. So there's nobody employed by my business. Everybody that works for Fable Verse is part of a freelance network. They have other clients and other agencies that they work with of their own, but I provide through Fable Verse a considerable amount of work for these freelancers on a month-by-month basis. So not only are they representative of my brand, they also feel like they can have ownership over client work. They have regular contact with the clients. They're basically employees in all but name, and it just gives them the freedom to have their fingers in lots of different pies, but also bring the skills that I need to my business. I'm able to access talent I wouldn't be able to access if I was focusing on exclusively having employees.
Yeah, I feel like that's a post-COVID thing as well. Like, I think that that's more. COVID has kind of facilitated this a bit more, where people can work wherever they want and they have that autonomy. And I love what you said there about them being employees in all but, what was it, all but name, or was it the opposite? I can't remember which way around it was.
Probably. I maybe I said the other way around.
Yeah, they're like employees, but they're not, basically. It's great. And I love that autonomy that you give people. I've obviously interviewed somebody for a previous podcast, Emma Dark, who you know well. So, yeah, no, it's fantastic that you've got that model. I thought it was worth highlighting to people, because when you told me that, it really stood out. And I thought it seemed very, very cutting edge, very 21st century.
So. That's the idea. We're trying to break free, break out the mold. And I agree that it's definitely post-COVID has accelerated that as an option.
And I feel like, if I was paying you money to manage an advertising campaign for me, I would probably feel a lot more secure in the knowledge that there's a specialist working on it, like with their specific areas. I know obviously there'll be times where people will diversify or move into different areas, but if you have a specialist designer working on a campaign, or if you have a specialist copywriter or a specialist ad manager that kind of, does that as their bread and butter every day, I think I would feel a lot more confident knowing that. Whereas sometimes within agencies, you do get generalists, and I get that that's just the way the model works. But I think with what you've got there, with a team of proper specialists, it must instill a lot more confidence within your clients.
Absolutely. And it means that they have a direct line to the people that are working on their projects. I think that's one of the things that I've noticed when being plugged into bigger agencies that are missing our skill set, is that they have a lot of generalists on their teams, but nobody who can deliver the actual work. And that's the benefit of having freelancers as your team, is you can get people who are really, really, really skilled, who as an employee would obviously, to command a very high salary. But you can have access to their skills for, basically an hourly rate. It just makes complete sense for them and for me.
Yeah. And obviously, tying in with the subject of this podcast, it ensures better quality management because they have more knowledge of their specific area. I just want to go back to something you said earlier, because I thought it was really interesting. And it's also on your website as well, where you say that we work in industries including like travel, culture, food and drink, etc. Anything that puts a smile on your face, and you referenced it there. What does it mean to you to put a smile on someone's face, and how does good quality management facilitate this outcome?
I think there's two answers to that. I think I'm looking at the smiles on the faces of the customer, so the end customer for all of my clients, but I'm also thinking about the smiles I can put on the faces of my clients. So good quality management of campaigns is integral to both of those things. It's not enough to set up an advertising campaign and just let it run. If you have a specialist working on your campaign, they're optimizing it every single day, that somebody who knows exactly how the ins and outs of these platforms work is watching your campaign, that could be spending, hundreds to thousands of pounds a day, is being managed, sort of on an hourly basis, you can be confident that you're going to get the results that you've been potentially promised at the outset of the campaign. That's how we deliver a smile, basically. Not only are we creating campaigns that are creative and tailored towards the audience, because we've got really, really strong people who understand, audience trends and understand what individual audiences for particular campaigns are looking for, and the pain points that we're trying to solve for them in the creation of the campaign, which makes the end customer happy. We're also delivering really positive service that is consistent and really well managed all the way through for the client, which makes what makes them happy in the end is they get a return on their investment.
Yeah, because you want to feel like, as you just said there, sometimes people invest in people as well as the results. So you want to feel like you're working with people who understand you and are, keeping you informed every step of the way. You don't just want to invest in something and then be like, yep, you got that back. And it's like, oh, great. And you don't feel like you've got that rapport with them kind of thing. Like I've been in agencies before where that's happened. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also, I think, something that happens regularly is that we meet with clients who have a very strong sense of what they want to achieve, but they have no understanding of how to achieve it. And I think it creates a much greater sense, like you say, of rapport with the agency you're working with, but also a confidence in the results you're going to get. If you have an agency or a group of people that are working on your project who can explain to you step by step what's going to happen throughout the process, it's one thing saying this is the result we want, but if you don't know how to get there, you need to be confident in the team that you've employed that they know how to get there. And
as you alluded to earlier, when you, as you have done, when you employ contractors and specialists, then I guess you build that confidence because you've got a long-term relationship with them, and then you can trust them to deliver that quality management.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. It's a benefit for the client because they don't have to employ somebody in-house on their side. They can contract us to do the work, but I've already done the hard work of vetting the freelancers. It's people that I know who've got really strong backgrounds, who have worked with particular brands that may be relevant before, etc. You can bring the right people to the table, basically.
Exactly. Well, I think I mean, I've got this next question written down, but I think you've answered it already, to be honest. You've given me loads of great insights. But what does the term quality management mean to you?
So the management of a campaign is really intricate. And I think this is where clients and other agencies need to look at the investment they're putting into not only the ad spend, but in the management fee that they're putting behind a campaign, because it really is important to invest in quality management, which I will describe to you now. The kinds of things that you need to do to make sure a campaign is performing in the way that you want it to perform are budget adjustment on a daily or weekly basis. So you need to be keeping an eye on fluctuations in spend. If there's a surge at certain points, in certain points of the month, in certain points of the week or the day. Copy adjustment. If you're doing A/B testing, you need to be ahead of, what's performing better, whether it's the length of the content, the different CTAs that are working, whether there's, more effusive content works better than more formal content, for example. In Google Ads, keyword adjustment, bidding on keywords, adjusting bids on keywords that are performing really well, taking out negative keywords that aren't performing as well, for example, adding, using query reports to inform what you're doing. What else is there? Audience refinement, looking at where their interest targeting or geographical targeting may be falling off, whether things aren't relevant, and device and placement optimization. Is your advertising performing on mobile versus desktop? Is Facebook better performing than Instagram? Is there somewhere, are stories performing better than Reels? Is there one you can drop to make sure the budget is performing the best it can? Yeah. If you're not doing any of that, you are sacrificing, what could be an incredible creative idea, what could be an incredible ad spend. You could be putting thousands of pounds behind an advertising campaign. If you're doing none of this optimization, which is what quality management is, you're basically, throwing, I don't even know what the term would be. You're throwing caution to the wind. You have absolutely no control over the outcome you're trying to achieve. And so for me, that's what quality management means, is having not only an understanding of all the things I've just described, but being able to implement them on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to be able to control the outcomes and control the campaign as it evolves, especially with the changes in algorithm that are happening all the time.
Yeah, well, you'll know about that more than me, but I mean, from an SEO and copywriting perspective, I always see a new Google update or a helpful content update. I'm just like, wow, another thing to, I mean, I guess this wasn't a question that I had written down, but just from what you're saying there on the subject of that, how much of what you do is being agile and responsive enough to these updates, and how much of it is just common sense? Do you know what I mean when I ask that? Because I feel like sometimes it's like, I always think if you do the basics right, and I don't want to, what you've just said there, it's like, they are the fundamentals. Now, people watching this who know very little about paid advertising, myself included, would look at that and go, that's a lot of stuff, but you would probably look at it and go, no, these are the fundamentals. But how much of that is sticking to those fundamentals, and how much do you find that you've had to, I suppose, change or revise your offering based on the updates, if you know what I mean? So how much of it is like responsive, and how much of it is just common sense?
That's really interesting. I think a lot of it is common sense. This is, you've just said it, is if you don't know what you don't know what you don't know, right? So if you don't know what common sense is, then you won't be able to apply it. So you have to have an understanding of what the fundamentals are to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But there are certain things that happen in the algorithm updates that you just can't ignore. For example, video production. Video is, for the most part, king in terms of driving conversions on D2C campaigns or B2C campaigns. That really is driven by client budget and client interest in investing in the quality of the campaign creative. Mm-hmm. That's really challenging. That's a really challenging thing that I find is, yes, you can have all of the, you can apply all the common sense to the way that you manage a campaign. You can apply all of the basics. You can do every tick box correctly. But if you don't invest in I don't know, in the magic bit, which is the bit where if you're an advertiser, you fundamentally understand what makes audiences tick. And that's what clients are paying for, what other agencies are paying for, is your expertise in understanding what makes audiences tick. What do they want to see out of advertising? And if you don't invest in that up front, then you're missing a trick, I think. So yes, I think you can do everything right, and that's fine. But there is a certain amount of agility that you have to have, and we like to have. And to be honest, the only reason that we are limited is sometimes because of client budget and interest and investment in pushing the boat out and trying different things and testing new things and leaning into your intuition, especially around certain audience types and certain creative types.
Well, there's the old saying that I've used for years, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't always make it drink.
Absolutely.
And that's true. Yeah.
It goes back to that point that we made earlier around, completely lost my train of thought.
Well, no, you were just talking about all the different things. I wanted to go back to this actually, all the A/B testing and all the meticulous things that you do in the background. I thought that was really interesting as well. And we were talking about the fundamentals of that. Really, it was more around being agile and responsive enough to react to these updates as they come in all the time, but also applying a bit of common sense, of which I'm sure you have plenty of with all your experience in your team as well.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah. So, I think, again, I feel like we have covered this, if not on this podcast, definitely on our catch-up call the other day. I know you had quite a lot to say about this, and we've even touched on one of them just now. But what are some of the biggest challenges that you and your team have faced when it comes to quality management, and how have you mitigated these challenges?
One of the biggest challenges is not having enough time within the budget to commit to consistent optimization. And the way we kind of get around it is pick and choose what's most important. So you can kind of start to see that at the outset of a campaign, whether it's going to be budget management or content management or updates to the creative, for example. There'll be certain points in higher spending campaigns where you have to refresh the creative because it gets ad fatigue, for example. So at the outset of a campaign, if you know you're going to be limited by time, you can take a look at, okay, what's likely to be the things that we're going to have to do to make sure that this campaign performs the best, and kind of pick and choose which are the most important to focus on. And that's usually the biggest challenge is balancing time against budget. And, very often it's trying to get client buy-in to spending a little bit more on management and a little bit less on ad spend. Because if you have great quality management going on in the background, you need to spend less in advertising spend to achieve basically the same result. So yeah, that's probably the biggest challenge. And again, that's because I just think of a lack of understanding. It takes a huge amount of skill to do this kind of work. And it's just a lack of understanding in how it all works in the back end, to be honest, that means people don't buy in the same way.
I mean, I guess it must be quite frustrating, and I don't want to make this too negative of a podcast. I don't want to dwell on the negatives, but it must be frustrating from your point of view when somebody commits to a certain budget, then they go back on that, and then they also want all of the things that you promised them initially for the new budget. And then it's like, yeah, but all of this quality management stuff, all of the additional work that we'd be doing, all the optimization, to go back to what you said right at the start there, well, that's only possible if you invest. And that's why I always use the word invest when I talk about services, because you're investing in it. You're not spending money, or you're not charging somebody. Only bulls charge, as I say. People are investing in that whole suite of solutions like that, So yeah, it must be really frustrating from your point of view when that inevitably happens in certain.
And to be honest, it's a conversation you have to have around managing expectations, like anything else. If somebody isn't prepared to pay what it costs to be able to manage the project they've put forward, you just then have to manage their expectations that the result might not be quite what was expected at the initial outset.
Exactly, and I don't want to reiterate to you what it is you do or explain it to you, because I'm sure you're well aware of the process. But for the viewers, things like, and again, I go back to it, but A/B testing is so effective. I mean, trial and error. The quickest way to make a big return on investment is to actually make mistakes early on and to do the A/B testing and see what works and doesn't. Whereas if someone is just going, there's my money, I don't have a lot of it, I want you to achieve miracles, see what you can do with that, there you go. I feel like there's more than a 50% chance that they don't get a result that they're happy with.
Absolutely. And you know what? I had a fantastic experience with a big client recently who said, we have a really small benchmark for the results that we want. But actually what we want to get out of this is some insight into how our audience are going to react to different types of advertising that we're doing. And it was music to my ears, because it's exactly the kind of thing that you need to invest in. And by the way, we achieved 400% more sales than they benchmarked for us at the outset of the project, and gained for them a huge amount of insight across 4 different audiences, what performed better with them, whether it was video or graphics, what kind of messaging worked really well, what kind of budget we needed to spend at different parts of the day, whether it was post payday, whether it was coming into spring versus just post Christmas. We gained loads of really valuable insights that they can directly now apply to the same campaign that they run next year that they absolutely didn't have before. And, ultimately, yes, of course, they spent ad spend and they had a management fee. They actually made a return on investment by the amount of sales that we made from the campaign. So, it was a win-win all around. And I just think sometimes it really is about understanding the rich data that you can get from something like this, and seeing that as your investment and seeing that as a really key part of your marketing strategy for the whole year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 400% more sales. I tell you what, it's almost like you know what you're doing, isn't it?
Isn't it funny?
I know, fableverse.co.uk, we'll do a plug at the end as well. But so once I was going to say once the campaigns go live, but let's look at it kind of before and after the go live. How intrinsically will you and your team manage the quality of your clients' advertising campaigns? So do you do it on a day-by-day or week-by-week basis? How does it typically work?
So the way that ideally we work is to understand what the client's marketing plan is for the whole year, so that we can see how advertising fits into sort of wider ecosystem strategy. And if we are able to provide creative direction and audience profiling and understand, or they provide it and we're able to use that to build out the audiences, we basically start from day one is getting under the skin of what the brand is, getting under the skin of what the audiences want from the campaign that's about to go live, regardless of whether it's just a one-off or whether it's part of a bigger, plan of advertising a suite of products or a suite of services, for example. Once we get to the point where the campaigns actually go live, obviously there's an initial setup phase, whether we're creating the ads, we're creating the creative, there's a housekeeping setup section where we're checking that landing pages work properly, that there's tracking set up across the whole suite of websites or software, back-end softwares. And once the campaigns go live, we're then looking at things on it. Like I said, it really depends on what the budget is for campaign management. But ideally, we like to look at something every single day, because there's fluctuations all the time, especially right at the beginning. Usually I say to clients, there's, before you start seeing real delivery on a campaign, you want to give it a warming period of 6 to 8 weeks. But during that period, we're monitoring every single day for, response, reaction, whether there's comments on the ads, whether there's, like I just said to you, whether video is performing better than graphics, whether short form copy is performing better than long form. Ideally, we'd be looking at that every single day. And that's across every single campaign, every single ad set. So yeah, it's involved. It's really involved. Yeah. And if we have to scale that back, then we're doing it on a weekly basis. But again, like I said, that's not preference. That's dictated by how much time is available in the budget.
And without wishing to, without naming specific names, have you ever worked in an environment, or are you aware of environments where agencies don't do that? I mean, would you say that a lot of agencies, because I feel like I've not ever worked in an agency where this has happened, but I have worked with agencies as the client where this has happened, where you get reports back a month later and there's like no day-to-day involvement, and even week by week you don't hear a lot from them, and when you do hear back it's usually negative. It's like, well, these ads aren't working, and you're like, well, why are they not working? Is that something that you have, again, not asking you to name names, but is it something that you have seen before, and what are maybe some of the, bolted onto that, another question is, what are some of the bad practices that you've seen firsthand in your time?
Generally, that's why we're brought in, because something like that has gone wrong, either within an agency or for a client who worked with another agency that don't do their due diligence, basically. That tends to be where we're brought in, because we're known for, consistent updates. You might not speak to a client on a weekly basis because that's it's too micro almost. You kind of want a 4-week period to look at. The way we get around that is providing live dashboards. So if clients or agencies that we work with are interested in seeing the results, like the sort of the actual data, we can set up live dashboards that feed every single day that are live, so that if a client wants to touch base on what the numbers are, then they can look at them, and then we tend to provide a sort of contextual analysis of what's happening on a monthly basis. That seems to be the best way that it works, because if you're trying to do it on a weekly basis and you've got clients that are desperate for sales, and the first week there's none, it's not a great conversation. It's not very positive. Whereas I feel, if you're looking at things from a performance basis, and you will just want to see how what's the stats look like, basically, then we can provide live updates on a daily basis. That's something that we always like to implement. To your second question, poor practice. To be honest, it's a raft of things. I think there's a real sense that you can, especially with Meta, that you can set up a Facebook campaign. I see it all the time where somebody said, oh yeah, of course, we just set up our own ads. We just boosted a bunch of posts and left them to run. But we didn't get anything off it. Advertising doesn't work for us. And I think there's a real sense that you can set it up to press play and go. And I think Meta feeds into that itself by shouting about its own algorithms. And yeah, of course, they do a lot of the work for you. It's fantastic the way that they're, especially now, the new Advantage Plus audiences and the Creative Plus toggles that you can switch on to improve your graphics or improve your content are really positive in some cases. In others, they're not successful, and you need to be able to know how to monitor them so that you can switch them off if necessary. For example, I think there's a feature that's in the last few months come out where you can add music to the top of your adverts that come up on stories, for example. But if it's auto-generated, which it is by Meta, sometimes it was a completely wrong piece of music against some ads. So we had some ads for a kid's theme park that went out with some classical music over the top, and the client was like, I've seen these ads, it's ridiculous, this doesn't match our vibe at all. And that was because we just switched on the Advantage Plus and the Creative Plus, and it just auto-generated. So that you absolutely have to be monitoring on a regular basis to avoid those things. And that's the sort of stuff that I see. I think especially with Google ads, you see, keyword lists, like hundreds and hundreds of keywords in a single ad set, which is just completely irrelevant. How are you supposed to narrow down the intent of when somebody's clicking on an ad if you've got hundreds and hundreds of keywords in an ad set? So there's all sorts of things that are happening because of the lack of quality management that lead to poor results for a client. And very often that's when we come in and tidy it all up, work alongside best practice, and ensure that the campaigns are delivering, basically. But yeah, it's a very common problem.
I'm sorry that this is what I took from that wonderfully eloquent answer you just gave, but I would have loved it if that kids theme park ad had screamo metal music over the top of it. That's what I was hoping you were going to say.
I think it was Vivaldi, so not quite screamo, but yeah, it's still not the vibe.
I'll tell you what, if it was the Four Seasons, though, that's a bit of a classic, isn't it?
If it had matched up with the roller coaster, it would have been
great. So this next question is quite a loaded one, because I feel like we could go into quite a lot of detail here. But from your experience, what personal and collective attributes are required within a team to ensure the best quality management?
Autonomy, absolutely. Confidence in your abilities, confidence in your work ethic, and dedication to genuinely, really having pride in your work, dedication to genuinely providing the best possible quality campaign and result. If my team feel proud of what they're putting out, which I hope they do, because I like to give them the autonomy over the creative and give them, real input, relationship with the client, understanding the audiences, then they have a vested interest in producing the result. And it reflects poorly on their work if they don't, because, by our philosophy, quality management is what delivers the results that you need alongside the campaign creative, which campaigns live and die by their creative. So absolutely, autonomy, giving care and attention, I think, as well as confidence in your abilities. That it's not special sauce. It's not magic dust. It's just plain old common sense. But it's really having pride in your work. And I think with advertising specialists, they are a really interesting bunch, because especially if you get people who are creative at heart and they understand how to sell, as well as having the technical skill that it requires to manage campaigns in the back end of this software, then you've got gems, and those people they're like gold dust. And so, that's what makes an excellent team, I think. And an excellent ads manager is somebody who feels really proud of what they're doing and applies not only their sort of data-driven and technical expertise, but also their creative mind and an understanding of the audience.
Care is just such a huge word there, care and pride. And I think that, to go back to your earlier point, and I feel like this ties in with a lot of what we said on this podcast, common sense isn't all that common. A lot of people within advertising agencies are not as diligent as they should be, or they don't care as much. I think but care is the key word. I think that's probably the biggest thing that I took from what you just said, because when you're spending so much money on advertising at times, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way for your profession, because I know that, listen, you want to make them a lot more than what they pay you. That's the nature of it. But still, some people will spend 5, 6, even at the bigger end, 7 figures on an advertising campaign. And I guess when they get the sense that the people who are entrusted to deliver the results don't really care that much and see it as a transaction, they're probably scratching their heads thinking, what the hell is going on? I mean, so care is, I think, the biggest thing that I took from what you just said there.
Sure. And I think part of that, in the context of my business and the projects on which we work, I think a big part of that is, we work with clients that aren't spending a lot of money. They're spending sort of £500 to £1,000 a month on advertising spend. It's not huge amounts of money. But if we deliver the results for them, it's an incredible return for them. It can sell out their courses, or it can, we had a festival that had a sort of a 785% return on investment. I think we completely sold out the festival. That's live and die for festivals. It's huge. And so, for us, that gives us a really strong sense of achievement and responsibility to, working with small businesses that, is the difference between their business being able to stay open if you're able to deliver the results. And that makes you take time and care, and it makes the quality management side even more important, It doesn't have to be big budgets.
It's a tangible difference, isn't it? And that's why to be honest, I'm starting to position myself now as a copywriter for solopreneurs and 1 or 2 people businesses, because you use that phrase, they live and die by your work and the results you get. I absolutely love that, because I do feel like, and this is nothing against large companies, because let's face it, if any large companies are watching this who want to work with Georgia, all right, then all ears, because they have big budgets. But on that point, somebody like a Samsung or a Nike or something like that, they'll just throw money at it, and I don't even know how much they'll track it. I was talking to my friend about this the other day. I said, well, if they get a banner ad, if Samsung get a banner ad on a big tech website, or Nike take out some ad space on TV, I don't know if it's called ad space, forgive me if it's not, but take out a billboard, right? I'm like, how do they track the ROI of this, and do they really care? I don't know if they do, because it's kind of like, well, they're going to make that much money anyway. They're not stupid, obviously, so I'm sure they do track it, but there's definitely less of a live and die thing, because they're going to survive anyway, and they could probably survive without advertising now. They're that big, kind of thing, so I really like what you said there about the type of people. Would you say that's your ideal client? I meant to ask that. Is it mainly the kind of the SMEs or the smaller businesses that you typically work with?
Generally, just because it fits with our philosophy, and because we can provide a variety of different services, it makes sense for them and it makes sense for us. So it tends to be our client profile. We will work with anybody as long as it's sort of not big oil and gas, To be honest, it's more of the application of the craft than it is about the business, if you see what I mean. It's more about, for us, it's about, can we provide a business with the quality service that they need to be able to achieve their goals? And if the answer to that is yes, then we will work with them, if it's within our making people smile sphere.
Making people smile, yeah.
But going back to your point about big companies, and that's one of the things that I find really interesting, is the bigger the brand. I've found that with some big brands that I've worked with, I won't name and shame on this podcast, but the big brands I've worked with, there's not a lot of a sense of joining up. So a lot of services will be provided by different agencies in silo, or different departments in silo. There's no sense that a particular campaign is tied to another. Yes, they might have 12-month marketing plans that have various activations at different points, but very often those activations will be provided by different people. And so there isn't this real sense of cohesion throughout the whole thing. And that's one of the things that I like to do when I work with a client, the kind of clients that I like to work with, where everything is in one place, where all the team are communicating with each other. They've got a really strong sense of brand that runs throughout everything. There's consistency across everything. So that's important for me from a client perspective. Because I always find that really challenging if you come into a big company and try and produce an advertising campaign that's completely separate from anything else they're doing. It doesn't necessarily deliver the results because it's not all tied in,
No, exactly. Well, I had to chuckle a bit when you used the word silo, because I remember in one company that I worked for, there was a dedicated PPC manager there. But I was determined to get some eyes on my blog post. So I basically went on Facebook, put out a post promoting it, and on LinkedIn, and I boosted them thinking, oh yeah, and looking back, it was such a naive move, and it got signed off, by the way, in case anyone was wondering. But I look at it and I thought we were definitely siloed in that case, and I probably shouldn't have done it. I think you used the reference of the boosted posts earlier, and a lot of businesses just do that. They put loads of money behind something and think, oh, this will deliver great results, and it's just, you just get tumbleweeds, I guess.
Do you know, I think that's something we should probably touch on, is the difference between, it's something I get asked a lot, and I hope I'm not going to take up too much time by saying this, but there's such a big difference between dedicated advertising campaigns and boosting. Very often when I speak to a client, they'll say, well, what's the difference though? Isn't it the same thing? No, it is not the same thing. Boosting is really, really, really useful if you have, say on Instagram, you have a post that has got loads and loads of engagement. The audience is exactly bang on already. They're commenting loads. You just want to amplify that. Perfect. That's what boosting is for. Outside of that, you've got basically minimal control on the audience building, what the objective is going to be, what the algorithm is going to pick up from it. It's really advertising light. And it works occasionally for boosting engagement on a particular, well-performing post. But outside of that, it's just not something that businesses should be really using. Certainly not as part of a strategic approach.
No, I've spoken to many business owners who've basically said, oh yeah, I've got a landing page live now, so I'm just going to chuck a few quid behind it and put it up on, Google Ads. Perfect. I'm advertising. It's like,
no.
Not really.
And this is the thing, is the answer to that is, and I have this conversation all the time, is you don't have to spend loads of money to make it work properly. If you invest a little bit into quality management and invest a little bit into our team to make that run for you properly, you will get far more return than you just throwing it up yourself and hoping for the best. And that's usually how that conversation goes.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. So what are some of the best projects you worked on in terms of quality management? So what kind of projects come to mind straight away if you think of it was managed well from start to finish, you had a clear understanding of the client's objectives, you had a rapport with the client, and you delivered the results they were looking for? I mean, you actually referenced a couple there. I don't know if you would maybe choose them, but what are some of the best projects you worked on in that regard?
Sure. So one of the first ones that I can think of is the festival that we promoted last year. Festivals are notoriously difficult to advertise. The audience for a festival is very fickle, especially in the last few years. People tend to buy very last minute. It's a big money outlay up front. Expecting people to pay sort of £200 to £400 for a festival ticket. It's quite a lot of money this day and age. So I was really proud of how we managed that. Not only did we sort of have to really understand, it's a very alternative festival. So not only did we have to really get under the skin of the audience from the beginning and understand what kinds of content might appeal to them, which included obviously not just festival posters and lineups and showcasing the acts, but also like almost trailer videos, which we had commissioned. But then being able to be reactive as the campaign went on. So riding the wave of dropping the budget down in the middle weeks of the month when people aren't spending because it's not payday, and then doing a real push around payday and changing the messaging up in the campaign to say, you've got money coming in this week, why don't you put your deposit down for the festival, payment plans are coming, etc. Being able to pivot to different kinds of payment plans as we went through the year and realized, we're not getting as much deposit up front as we're expecting. Let's try and test different payment messaging. Basically, having the ability to flex and be agile around how the campaign performed meant that we were able to by the end, it was by the skin of our teeth, just because of the nature of the way, people aren't spending money the way they used to, and they're doing it right at the last minute. But the week before the festival, we got to the point where we'd sold out, and they had a 785% return on investment on their ad spend. And I think their ad spend was somewhere in the region of 15,000. So it wasn't wild for a whole 12 months. And we did advertising across Meta and Google, and that was it, just the two platforms. And, having the ability to be able to be reactive and flex meant that we were able to achieve the sales that we just wouldn't have been able to do without the advertising. Beyond ads, we did some email marketing and a little bit of local radio stuff. But beyond that, there was not a lot going on. It was mailing list stuff to the already warm audience, and then a bit of, radio to a cold audience. But most of the sales were driven from advertising. If we'd have pressed play and left that, we just wouldn't have achieved what we were able to in the end. So it was really down to being able to flex budgets, flex content, flex messaging approaches and payment plans, etc. Bring those in, change up the content when it was ad fatigue, etc. That was the making of it, really.
There's so much to unpick there, and I think that's an amazing example. If I kind of work through it chronologically, if I work through your response chronologically, the first thing that jumped out to me is how much goes on in the background. When you talked about getting the videos made, even like how much kind of budget needs to go into that, and then all the radio advertising, but then having to respond to problems as and when they arise. And I bet there was a few of them. But again, getting the timing right as to when the ads should go out. When do you get the most? I don't know if you do this, but like, when's peak time for conversions, that kind of stuff, and do we target more at that time? And then, because that could easily have ended up like the what was that festival? Was it the Fire Festival? Do you remember that?
Yes.
Absolute disaster. Like, imagine if but like there's a bit of a difference, because he was some douchebag from New York who had millions in the bank. With something like this, if you don't get those sales or you don't get people through the doors, like, that's going to fall completely on you, and it's going to be a bit of a disaster all round. As much as I don't like to use that word, but it kind of is, really. It's like pretty serious stuff. And the fact that you managed to smash it out the ballpark like that is amazing. So, kudos to you. I tip my hat off to you and your team, because that sounds really cool. But like that was just what I unpicked from all of that, was just, how easily it could have gone wrong, but also what you had to manage as well, the number of plates you had to spin. I think that's a great example.
Absolutely. And not just that, you're managing client expectations in the background. We're talking about a small family-run festival. It's their entire livelihood. They're panicking, stressing about, well, why aren't people buying now? What's going on? I don't understand how to do this. Can you talk me through what you're doing here to make this work? That you are spinning a lot of plates. And I think, going back to what I said earlier about investing in the team and the people and the time and the management that goes in behind this, if you understand what it takes to achieve what can be achieved, then I feel that businesses are more open to putting money behind it and understanding that you need to invest in the team. If you don't have an understanding of all the bits and bobs that go on, and all of the cogs that are turning, and all the plates that are spinning, even, it's easier to dismiss and just say, well, press play and leave it, and then wonder why you don't have the results that you want.
Exactly. I want to apologise to anyone watching this, by the way. I don't know how good my Wi-Fi has been at your end, Georgia, but I keep getting a message saying that my Wi-Fi isn't great. But we're at the end of the podcast now anyway, so it's too late now. If people have any problems watching me, well, I'm sure most people don't care about me. They just want to know what Georgia has to say, and what she said has been wonderful. So thank you so much, Georgia, for coming on. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you or find out more?
Mostly on LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Georgie Mizen, Mizen. And you can find our website, www.fableandverse.co.uk.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you once again, Georgia. And I'm off to go and boost some blog posts, so I will catch you all later.
Great to speak to you. Thanks so much.